That was cool.
After Us is a chilling look at a world, well, after us. After everything. As chilling as it is, it can also be hauntingly beautiful. There is a new biome to marvel at around every corner, and with a new visual flair for each area. You'll also be tested in different ways and unique ways to each zone, making sure you'll never get tired of exploring this post-apocalyptic world. This is After Us. So, before we get started, a quick disclaimer. If you're not interested in the backstory and you just want to get to the review, then go here. So, disclaimer. I have a very strong connection with the first game made by this company. On top of that, I actually even interviewed the director of Piccolo Studio. On top of that, I was also provided this copy of the game by Private Division for a review copy. So, I will try not to let my connection to the first game fog this critique of this game. I want to be able to judge this game by not as another Piccolo game, but just as another game. Having said that, there is some cases where I really just can't get past it, so I will be putting up a flash of bias warning. Meaning I'm biased about this particular topic because of the previous game that I like so much. And that way you know that it's my own personal bias talking and not necessarily the review of the game itself. Also, about getting provided a copy and even talking to the director in the past. I owe it not just to myself and not just to you, but to the studio to be 100% honest. If all I'm doing is a circus show to please the overlords, that's not really gonna do anybody any favors. A company making video games can't properly grow if it can't also have some critique. So, I will not be letting any of my connections and the fact that I got a copy affect this review. Okay, disclaimer is over. Let's get started. We'll start with the visuals. I personally like it when a company goes for a more artistic feel versus the ultra realistic. One, this can give a game a unique look. And two, the uber realistic games, it's easier to see the cracks and when the game falters. Recently, we got shown a game that looked too good, way too good to be true, recorded or something like that. People were questioning whether it was even real or if somebody just altered GoPro footage. If this game was anywhere near that sort of realism, I think that it would make the overall spiritual nature of this a lot less impactful, because you would know that that doesn't really happen that way, or it's not real. You would just know, so it would actually end up hurting it more than helping it. All of that is to say that this isn't the most beautiful game in the sense of how many pixels there are per square inch, but rather what it decides to do with those said square inches. Dark cities, flowing garbage heaps, a desolate lumber wasteland, an underwater world. All not necessarily beautiful in the traditional way, but rich with little details. So much storytelling is done with the visuals. Like when you stumble across something like this. A group of people seemingly worshipping this sludge or oil spewing out of the earth. Little hints as to what exactly happened to cause the downfall of man. Then there's the character Gaia. She is a bundle of light with long flowing white hair. They have clearly gone through the trouble of creating each strand of hair and giving it physics, which might not say a lot, but here is Aloy from the newest Horizon Forbidden West. The texture of the hair makes it look like there are individual hairs, but for the sake of processing power or whatever, her hair is more kind of clumped together in groups, and they all flow and fall as one. Gaia's hair, however, flows and falls as a singular strand of the overall hair. It's really well done. The hair acts very natural during cutscenes and gameplay. This added depth is really kind of unneeded, but you have to applaud the effort. It's the one thing that could make you question if whether or not this could be on the PlayStation 4 or a lower quality console. On top of all of that, she has the ability to burst out light, and grass will grow everywhere on the ground. Vines will come down from the ceiling. And much like the hair, each blade of grass acts as its own. You can even have grass grow around your feet as you're walking around. Making a character that has hundreds of strands and is always emitting light was an interesting decision, but I think it paid off because it shows off their finesse. It shows off the lighting effects, and I think that it was done very well. My biggest negative for the visuals is that the beginning area is so desolate. It's just a cityscape. And even though they have a lot to differentiate each of the different sections, like having cranes and even a downpour of rain, it does become a bit samey. It took me about 3 hours to get through this to the more open-ended section where you can get to the different biomes. This is where each spirit has its own biome, and they're very, very different from one another. After this point of the game, each area has its own visuals and even mechanics. So keep in mind, the 3 hours is me trying to 100% with all the collectibles. So while it was 3-ish hours for me, there's a good chance that you might take a lot less time. Regardless, it must be said, because I feel there could be some people that check this out and in the early game start thinking, is this all there is? To those people, I'd say, please give it a little bit more time. I am the first to admit that my ADD can make 10 minutes feel like 12 hours, but I assure you, the visuals really get so much better, and just look at these vistas. Next up, we'll talk about the sounds. The game, like its predecessor, opts to use no dialogue or narration. And while Gaia sings, it's more just singing out notes rather than words. So this means that the story is 100% in the visuals around you and the levels themselves. All of the story is done with frozen statues or drawings and in the environment itself. So not a negative by any means, but if you go into this expecting a grand, poetic, epic of a story, and instead you have to kind of search for the story, you have to read between the lines, I could see someone being sort of let down. But as long as you go into this with the right expectations, I feel you'll really like it. Then we have the music. Nothing particularly stands out to me. That's neither a negative nor a positive, because I just don't think of a theme from the game. Everything seems like it could be placed in one of those lo-fi girl YouTube channels. Again, not saying that it's bad, just pointing out instead of this iconic score that reminds me of the time I spent in the game, think of Mario World. you hear that, and you don't necessarily just think of Mario, but rather your time in that specific world. With this feeling more like a random playlist, it just means that it feels more like ranch that you have the waiter put on the side and you can sprinkle it on yourself, rather than being a crucial part of the entree itself. When I hear this, I immediately tear up just a little bit because I think of the time with the game. And when I hear this one, my heart breaks. You'll notice that both of these have the same melody, but it's presented in different ways, and it invokes a different feeling. So to conclude, not a bad thing, but not a good thing, and unfortunately that's all I can say. Okay, time for the main part of the game, and that is the gameplay. This game is a platformer and a narrative story, and with a good variety of visual changes and mechanical changes for each biome, the gameplay keeps you interested throughout. If one were to falter, the others would need to pick up the slack. And if it goes back and forth, that's okay, as long as they can find the right balance. So let's start with the platforming first. Here's what I had to say about the jumping in Piccolo's first game. Keep in mind, this is still a great game, but I still must mention the god-awful jump. Sometimes you jump high. Sometimes it's only a hop. Sometimes when you push the analog in one direction, he'll jump in the direction that he's facing rather than the one you tell him to. And sometimes you push the damn button, but apparently he just doesn't want to. Sorry. I can report that the jumping is much better in this game, and I felt way more in control. You can double jump, glide, mid-air dash, wall run, giving you not just more control, but making the levels themselves have more interesting layouts. There is also a nice little circle that shows up under your character to let you know where the character will land. The circle getting smaller the closer you get to the ground. I feel like this in particular is a direct reaction to the criticism they had from the first game. It's a wonderful quality of life to the jumping and the platforming. But every once in a while, I'll jump and I just won't move. Just straight up into the air and then straight back down. Luckily, there are few times that this actually happens, and it never seems to happen in like a high octane, stressful situation. So I wouldn't call this game breaking. I would just call it an annoyance that happens every once in a while. Another minor nitpick is that you can double jump and glide, or you could double jump and then air dash, not both. But the game doesn't really do a good job of telling you this. There's nothing in the game to indicate you've already used the dash, for instance, so you can't glide anymore. Keep in mind, this didn't happen often because of the level design. I get that they didn't want to litter the screen with too many bars or currencies or anything like that. Instead, they wanted to leave 100% of the screen to their beautiful visuals. Totally get that, but maybe if her hair / the light emitted from her got just a little bit dimmer after using the dash or a glide, this would just be a great visual tell to let you know that you've already used up your energy. Also, the camera can play a large role in whether or not you land a jump. In Arise, the camera was actually controlled by them, the developers. This meant they could more control the flow of the game and where exactly you're looking. making it a lot less likely that you'd miss something because of the camera being at some weird angle. Again, the levels themselves are made in such a way that I never seem to have a problem when you're trying to look around and the camera clips into something. Nothing like that happens. So it might have seemed like I just tore up the jumping, but I do feel like talking about these little grievances can just set expectations correctly. Overall, the game platforming works great, and you will feel in control and even be able to find these sections of the games where the movement can get this great flow state. So while we're sort of on the topic, let's talk about level design. Like I said, they are made in a way that the camera is never an issue, unless you have it in the wrong place. But if there's this long jump, for instance, 9 times out of 10, I can place the camera directly above me or at an angle, and it'll give me the perfect look so I can land the jump perfectly. Very rarely, and possibly at all, is there a jump obscured in some way that you can't find a way or can't find an angle to make it impossible to miss. As for the parts where the developers do take a little bit of control and maybe zoom out a bit, these are done great and in the perfect spots. Then there is the substance of the levels themselves. I'm going to start off with the negative first this time so that we can end in a good place and you think that I actually like it. So the platforming itself isn't that hard. Jumping from A to B and just figuring things out isn't really that difficult. I hesitate to say that it's basic, but just not very complex. Each biome will have its own puzzle of sorts, like shooting out a light to stop a saw blade and then jumping on that saw blade and then shooting it again to another saw blade. Or when you're underwater, you can jump a lot higher and you can glide a lot further and so on. But the platforming itself just never really challenged me. The challenge was more just finding my way around. I think the main crux of this is the fact that you can take each biome in whatever order that you want, meaning instead of level 1 being your introduction and then level 10 being a challenging gauntlet where everything you've learned will be tested to its fullest. So instead, they had to design this in a way where you can play the entire game. That way, if you go to the lumberyard first or the cityscape first, it will translate pretty well one-to-one. But then can this make it too basic? I think that's up to you. So to the positives, each biome is set up as a wonderful tapestry you get to explore and run through. Each biome has its own feel, both in the visuals and in the way you actually play it. You'll be jumping higher in the ocean, pushing minecarts around down in the mines, growing spirit trees and then launching yourself off of them in a dead forest. So while platforming itself, the act of jumping from here to here, will never be intense or overtly challenging, the platforming itself is ever-changing in interesting ways. What lays ahead in each new zone made getting there and getting through them constantly engaging. Part of the fun was getting to a new place and trying to figure things out. Its variety is a great way to keep you going until the end. Okay, so let's talk about the narrative. This plays arguably just as big of a part in the game. What I can say that is in no way a spoiler is that the story itself just didn't really connect with me that much. The character Gaia didn't 100% connect with me either. So when she/I am in trouble, I just didn't really feel any dread, or I didn't really worry or anything like that. Partially because I didn't really have that personal attachment. Like if Joel or Ellie was in danger, even though I knew most likely that they'd be okay, I would feel that dread, that feeling in the pit of my stomach, because what they were going through as people that don't exist. I think part of the reason is you play as a human, or in Arise, you play as a spirit. You can still connect with him because you live his life. Even if it's full of metaphors and therefore not the quote-unquote real world, Gaia is a celestial being who doesn't speak, has powers, and pretty much no consequences. This may take a bit, but here's a good example of what happens during a combat encounter. Oh no, there's so many of them. Oh no, I have been grabbed. Let me press X a few times. Okay, but I better not let it happen again. Nope, apparently I'm just fine. But surely a third time would be way too much for her, right? Nope, totally fine. Here is footage of how frantic you can get while trying to get out of trouble. So because I know that there isn't really any real danger other than a ledge that I can immediately respond from, these combat encounters become just a nuisance. The first few encounters sort of made me think, okay, there's going to be some nuance. Like, here is some that are normal, here's a bigger one that takes longer to take down, and here's even one that you have to hit from behind. But soon I found out that the danger just isn't really there. And worst of all, even if you do die, you don't actually have to start the encounter over. You just pick up right where you left off. This may have been because I died to some sludge rather than an enemy, but still. So yeah, at first it felt like they were going to continue to put you in interesting situation. But then it just sort of became them throwing 10 at you. And then they threw 20 at you. The danger just wasn't there. The connection to the character and therefore the dread just wasn't there. So to be honest, I think I would have preferred these parts just be removed and the game focus more on the narrative and the overall spectacle of it all. So here we go again. You ready? This doesn't mean that the game is broken and boring or even bad. It may seem like I'm doing nothing but complaining about the game, and that must mean I'm going to give this a 3 out of 10. Far from it. If I gave number scores, I think it would be a lot closer to a B-. It's not top of the class, but it's more than just passable. So this game has amazing visuals. Each biome offers not just a new pretty thing to look at, but also a whole new way to explore the world and experience the story. While the game will never challenge you necessarily, it will always surprise you with what can be around the next corner. Pushing forward out of pure curiosity is part of the fun. It's a very good platformer, and at the budget price of $29.99 with 10 plus hours of gameplay, I'd say it's definitely worth the price of admission, and as long as you go in with the right expectations. Hopefully throughout this review, I've set those expectations correctly. My final verdict is a bit tougher because while I think it's great, and even worth the budget price that it launches with, that for me would make it an easy day one purchase. However, I always try to look at it with a more general sense and take myself out of the equation, try to see it from a different perspective. Given that, I think this could be rated as a wait for a sell or rent. If you feel that I have adequately set your expectations and you feel $29.99 is a fair price, then go for it. But if anything I've stated today is a deal breaker or even concerns you, I would do a little research, look at other reviews, then decide. And that's why I have to rate it the way, because if I can't 100% guarantee that you would like this, then I just can't give it a day one purchase. So that is the review. Thank you guys so much for joining me on ThreadX3 Productions. If you want more reviews like this, or maybe even a Rise a Simple Story review, go here. Or just stay on this channel. Make sure to subscribe, make sure to like, and there'll be plenty more videos coming soon.